Hello everyone, welcome back to the Daily Knitter Knitting Podcast. My name is Tiffany. Happy 2025. This is going to be kind of a mega episode because I filmed the last two videos a while ago and it's actually been almost 3 weeks to maybe 4 weeks since I've done any podcast updating. So I actually have 4 completed objects, a ton of whips, some acquisitions, and I will talk about future plans as well. So as usual, I will have chapters down below in case you are interested in particular items and want to skip through the video. But let's start off with completed objects. One of my goals of 2025 was to really be detailed in my Ravelry project notes. So that's not only keeping track of the yarn, but also how much I spent on the yarn, how much pretty much exact yardage, if possible, of yarn I used for a project. If my gauge happened to be different than the project, I would note that, and any modifications I made. And that just makes filming these podcast episodes a little easier for me, but I also appreciate it when other knitters put a lot of detail into their Ravelry projects, especially when I'm looking to cast on something new. So I thought that was the least I could do this year as a small goal for myself. And I think I've been able to achieve that. All of the completed objects and my whips will be linked down below on my Ravelry, so that if you are curious, you can just go to my Ravelry, which is always linked down below as well, and look for even more details. But I'm also going to make a better effort at making sure that my podcast episodes have all the information you would need in my completed objects section, so that in case you have general questions or want to get a sense of the project from start to finish, that information is available to you without disclosing too much of a pattern, especially if it's a paid pattern. So I hope that makes sense, but the first one I am actually wearing today, which has been rare because most of you know, if you've been following me, I am currently 7 months pregnant. I know it doesn't look like it when I'm sitting down because it's mostly from the chest up, but I do have a little belly, and so even so, I am still knitting garments to fit my pre-pregnancy size. And I obviously have no idea what my body post-pregnancy is going to be like, but I'm pretty petite, and I think even if my stomach area ends up being a little bigger than it was pre-pregnancy, for the most part, my other measurements have not really changed even in pregnancy, so I don't think they're going to change that much post. I hope that makes sense. So I'm still basically knitting for the size that I would be knitting for when I was pre-pregnancy. So the first one that I have completed is my second step-by-step sweater by Florence Miller. This is a completely knitted in the round, top-down raglan sweater. It's a very basic construction. I will go into the yarn first. The yarn that I use is this really beautiful tonal yarn, and I actually have an extra hank here, and it's the Knit Picks Hawthorne fingering weight. I believe it's their sock yarn because it's 80% superwash Highland wool. Oh, I actually didn't realize it was superwash wool. Okay, 80% superwash wool, 20% polyamide. It's considered a fingering weight, and the gauge when it's held single is about 7 times 4 is 28 to 30 stitches, depending on the needle size that you use. And I held this yarn double to create this sweater because this sweater gauge is actually meant to be 16 stitches. So I just loved this fingering weight yarn, and I can't even remember why I purchased it originally. I purchased this and 2 other hanks. I think maybe they were just on sale, or I was just curious to try out some of this yarn, and I just wanted to experiment. And I feel like the step-by-step sweater is a great sweater pattern to experiment with. 1, because it's free, so it's like very low risk. 2, I've knitted one before, so I'm very familiar with the construction. 3, the construction is so basic that you almost don't even need to look at the pattern once you're used to it. Very standard raglan increases. And then once you get to the body, you're obviously just knitting in the round. So it's a great pattern for me to test out different yarns. I don't know. So that's kind of how I thought about it. However, you will probably notice in this lighting that clearly there are some differences as to what was going on with this yarn. So since I'm talking about the yarn, I will point this out now. I had originally only purchased, I think, 2 hanks of this yarn, and it says it's tonal, and when you get it, there is a variation of dyeing. You can really see even in this one hank how varied it is. But for some reason in my brain, I just thought, oh, Knit Picks is like a big company. They probably have way more consistency in their dye lots, even though, you know, as a good knitter, you should always be purchasing from the same dye lot. And I should have known, because clearly even just within this one hank, there's a lot of variation that these hanks would not match. But again, this sweater to me is just like a comfort sweater knit. It's more just to have something to knit on when I want something mindless. And I figured if there's some variation in color, it's not going to bother me that much, which it doesn't, to be honest. I still think it looks really good, and on camera I don't think you can really even tell when my arms are down, but you can clearly tell where I picked up for the sleeves. There's a really, really stark line, and I have to say it did make it easy for me to measure the sleeves when I was knitting them, because I was like, where? Because sometimes it's a little hard to tell where you picked up, especially if you picked up really cleanly. But with this like stark line, I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly where I picked up. So I think that's just kind of hilarious. This other sleeve doesn't seem to be as bad, but essentially I knitted the entire body in the hanks that I originally had, and then the extra yarn is for the sleeves. So that too, in my head, I was like, well, worst case, if the sleeves are really different, at least it looks like semi-intentional, and it could almost pass off as like one of those baseball tees where the sleeve color is different than the body. It's funny that this sleeve is not as bad. I mean, you can kind of see it here. You can definitely tell that there's a line, but again, it honestly doesn't bother me that much. Like I said, this is a comfort knit for me. This is probably not the last time I'm gonna knit this sweater. Let's talk about the construction now. So like I said, it is completely knitted in the round, which is why it's super beginner friendly, because besides the ribbing details, you really don't have to purl much in this sweater. The actual pattern calls for 16 stitches and 22 rows. I would say with a raglan, for the most part, your like width gauge is going to matter a lot more than your row gauge. Unless your row gauge is completely off, then that could affect, you know, obviously the raglan and where you cut for the sleeves. But for the most part, as long as you hit 16 stitches, you should probably be fine. And like I said, I used the Knit Picks held double. I did do some modifications. In the pattern, she gives you 2 options for the neckline, and I've done the same one for both my sweaters, and it's the folded one. So she essentially has you knit basically a turtleneck length, and then you fold the collar in on itself and knit them down together, and then you continue on to the body, so that just the neckline itself is actually double layered, which I like. I'm wearing a turtleneck underneath just because this yarn is like a little itchy. I'm very sensitive to any type of wool and alpaca and every type of animal fiber pretty much, except for cashmere. So I tend to like to wear a turtleneck or something so that it's not quite on my neck. I think the next time I knit this sweater, I will try her funnel neckline just to do something different, but this is technically the neckline that I prefer to go with. So you knit that, and then you go into the raglan details, which I'll just lean in a little close. It's a little hard with my with my belly, but I believe it is a 2-stitch raglan. So there's basically 2 raglan stitches in between here. It's a little hard to tell with this tonal, but I'll try to put a photo of it. That might make it a little bit easier to see. And you essentially just knit it all the way down, and you do ribbing. She gives you options for the length of the ribbing. So she tells you to knit the body to a certain length, and then tells you how long the ribbings should be. So if you want to modify how much ribbing you want to do, you would just add that length to the body instead, which is what I did. So now I'm going to talk about the modifications. One is, you might be able to tell, I did very small ribbed cuffs. I think these are maybe 2 centimeters, maybe 2.5 after blocking, 2.5 centimeters of ribbing, whereas in her pattern, she calls for 7 centimeters of ribbing on the sleeves and on the body. I think for the neck, I actually followed her exact instructions, so I didn't modify the neck length ribbing at all. I personally don't love knitting ribbing. I think that's a pretty universal thing. I really don't love 1x1 rib, just knitting it. I don't know, it's just finicky, and if I can shorten it, I will. So what I did is I essentially just subtracted 5 centimeters and added that length to the sleeve and the body rather than the ribbing so that I could do a shorter rib. And that's just my preference. Like, some people like a long ribbed look, and I do think it's an aesthetic choice, so that's totally up to you. It's very easy to modify. The other modification I made, I'll just mention here, even though you can't see it, but I thought it would just be, I don't know, a funny thing to add because I just want to go into detail. But initially, when I was doing this pattern on the body, I wanted to experiment with the finishing that is the same as the cloud blouse. I'm going to put a picture here. You can see that in the cloud blouse, it might not look like it, but there's essentially a tiny edge of ribbing, and then she does a rolled edge. And how you do that is just you do the ribbing so that the garment lays flat, and then you basically knit a few rounds, and then you do a traditional bind off, and then because it's just all stockinette, it'll just naturally roll up. And I really love that finishing in both of the cloud blouses that I have done before. However, the cloud blouse pattern is very much a DK, almost potentially even sport weight patterns, like sport to DK weight. And so I think the rolled edge just looks cleaner in that weight. This is a 16 stitch gauge, so that's like what, worsted weight, maybe even Aran weight. And when I had done that for the body, I didn't do the sleeves yet, so I washed the body, blocked it. It looked awful. I did not like the way it looked at all. And thankfully, I made sure I did bind off, but I didn't cut any of the thread or sew in anything. So knowing that potentially I'd want to frog that part. So that is what I ended up doing. I completely blocked it. I don't even think I took a picture. I apologize. I probably should have to show you how ugly it is so that you don't do it. But yeah, that was just an experiment because, again, this is like a very low-key project for me. So I did not like how that looked, frogged it, and ended up just knitting the body regularly and doing standard 1x1 ribbing. So that was a little bit of an aside, but I figured I would mention that in case anyone was thinking of doing that in this weight of a sweater. I just don't think it looked good, and it just added bulk to the bottom of the sweater, and it didn't block quite right, and I just, again, didn't like the way it looked. So I think the 1x1 standard ribbing looks fine. Lastly, I will just mention the measurements that I got with this particular sweater, and the total length I got was 50.5 centimeters. I believe hers is slightly longer, I think. My chest is 98 centimeters. Hers, I think, is 100, so I pretty much almost hit that. And the arms are 43 centimeters, which I don't think she actually gives you that measurement in the actual pattern, but that's pretty much on par. Let's see if she puts the length here. So I don't think she actually even puts a length in her measurements. Sometimes Petite Knit does that, which is helpful, but I get it because length is like the easiest thing to modify, so I feel like you tend to modify that anyways. But I pretty much hit the measurements for this size, which I'm so sorry if I didn't even mention this, size B. I'm going to try to have at the beginning like just a little rectangle information stuff rundown, so even though I'm mentioning it later in the portion, you have it right at the top. So anyways, I can't be more pleased with this pattern. Like I said, it's free, very beginner friendly, would totally recommend it. Great mindless knit, even for someone who's not a beginner anymore. I think the next time I knit this, I might even go up an extra size to the C just to see how that looks on me. I like the way this fits, and it is slightly a little has a little give. Now that my chest is bigger, it's less give, I think, than the pattern recommends. So I probably could have even gone up a size C to C anyways with my pregnant body. I'm usually like an A cup. So, and I don't think these boobs are gonna stay once the baby comes out. So it'll probably fit just even more a little oversized once I am not pregnant anymore. But I am curious how even a bigger size would look. So I think the next time I cast this on, I will try the size C. And that is my step-by-step sweater. The next finished garment I have is the cutest little vest for me. No, I'm just kidding. Could you imagine? For my baby. And it's funny because I wasn't planning really, honestly, on knitting him that many things, because in my head, I'm like, well, he's just gonna grow out of them in a year, potential, maybe 2 years. Like, I could stretch a garment, so why am I gonna spend so much time making him one? And that was my attitude going into 2025. However, what ended up happening is I had originally purchased this yarn, which is the Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino in the color Slate Green. I purchased 2 skeins of this, wanting to knit myself a Harris hood, which I'm gonna share in a second, which is my other finished object. However, I definitely miscalculated how much yarn I was gonna need. I must have just misread the pattern because I needed 3 skeins. And Knitting for Olive, I think they're priced really well for all of their yarns, but they do charge shipping. Maybe they have free shipping over a certain amount, but they are shipping. There's nowhere near me locally that sells Knitting for Olive, so I have to purchase it through their website. So there was going to be an extra shipping cost, and I was like, okay, just to buy one more skein, it was like barely worth the cost of shipping, you know, because it's basically the same cost. So in my head, I was like, okay, what can I do with 2 skeins of heavy merino, which the gauge for that is like 18 stitches. So I clearly wasn't going to be able to make a garment for myself or a sweater or a hat. I was just like going back and forth between patterns, like trying to figure out what I could use that yarn for, because I did want to use the yarn because I'm curious about Knitting for Olive, and because we don't have it locally, I really wanted to try to knit something and see if I like their yarns. So that is how I came to the conclusion of, okay, I'm gonna just knit him a little baby vest. So this is the Stockholm Slipover Mini by Petite Knit. I knit this in the size 1 to 2 years. So the mini, which is the smallest size in the mini pattern, it goes from 1 to 2 years to I think maybe 7 to 8 years old. And it's just so cute. I absolutely love this color. I just think it looks really good. And I have to say, the yarn, when you're knitting with it, the heavy merino, feels very rustic as you're knitting. And I was a little worried because when I was feeling it next to my neck, I was like, it feels substantial, but it does not feel itchy. So that was good. But even then, as I was knitting it, I was like, this is like a very rustic yarn. It almost felt like a really thick Peer Gynt yarn. And I was getting like a little worried. So in my head, I was like, well, it's a vest anyway, so he's gonna probably wear this over a shirt. So even if he was sensitive to wool, it's okay because it's not really gonna be next to his skin anyways. So I just kept knitting it. Once you block this, wow, does it transform. I mean, just look at that. And I just think it looks so good. I think it hides a lot of your imperfections while knitting, to be frank, just because it really, like the stitches really bloom. So it looks super uniform, even if you're a tidy knitter, you know. But I think if you were maybe less of a tidy knitter, this yarn is very forgiving. And the color as well, because it's a dark color. And I just think it just looks so good. It looks really professional. Like, I'm really proud of this piece. And yeah, so construction wise, I knit this on 4.5 millimeter needles for the body and 3.5 for the ribbing, which I believe is the same that it calls for in the pattern, and that's what the recommended gauge for this yarn is as well. I did manage to hit gauge perfectly, so all my measurements are the same as the actual pattern, which was great. And yeah, so the construction for this is similar to a lot of Petite Knit patterns where you cast on for the back and you essentially knit let's see, I want to say you knit, did you knit increases? No, this is just a square back, I'm pretty sure. So you basically just knit a rectangle, and then you pick up for the shoulders. You can kind of see it here maybe a little bit where I picked up for the shoulders. You knit the little shoulders up front, knit the front panel, join in the round, and do finished ribbing, finish it off with 1x1 ribbing on the neck, armholes, and the body. And I did follow the pattern pretty much exactly. So I did the same amount, like the same length of ribbing, because it's just so small, because he's such a small, obviously this is a small garment, so I didn't feel like this was minuscule amount of ribbing compared to an adult size sweater. So I just kept it all the same. And it was very easy. I think I knit this in 3 days, maybe 2 days. Actually, let me see, because it's in my Ravelry of what date. Okay, I knit this in 1 day. 2 days, aka, you know, like I started on the 2nd, finished it, and blocked it on the 3rd. And it makes sense because it's so small. So and the gauge is so thick that I'm not surprised that I finished it that quickly. And basically after I knit this, I was like, okay, I get the appeal now. I get the appeal of knitting baby garments, because yes, while they grow out of them quicker, these are so quick to knit up that, you know, the fact that it took me 2 days essentially to knit this finished piece, I don't mind if he wears it once, maybe twice, you know, because the experience of knitting was still really fun for me. And the joy of eventually seeing him wear it will be worth it for me. So I guess now I'm converted to, I am definitely more open to knitting him baby stuff, and I already have a whip that's for him as well. So this is not going to be the last time that you see a baby garment on my channel, but it's so precious. I think it's so cute. The next 2 completed objects are accessories. The first one is the first thing I finished in 2025, maybe. It is the Harris hood by Coco Amore Knits. And I was so intrigued by this pattern. I think I can't remember who, I saw it on someone's channel who was doing a holiday gift knit guide, and this one came up. And this is a pretty popular pattern, I think, because once I saw it on there, I feel like I saw it everywhere. And I had wanted to test out the Knit Picks sock yarn held double. So that's what I used for this as well, the yarn. This is a 1 size hood. And the gauge is, I think it's like 18 stitches, or it might even be 16. Okay, it's 17 stitch gauge. And so what I ended up doing, because I had this hank of the Knit Picks yarn, of the sock yarn, I wanted to try it held double and see what gauge I could get with that. And I figured a hood was going to be a good project because it's 1 size. So if it's a little small, a little big, it's not the end of the world. So that was a logic behind why I chose to do this yarn. The yarn is the same as this one, the one that I'm wearing. It's just in a different colorway, and it's in Deer Island. So I think it's called Deer Island Tonal. Technically, it's part of like their tonal collection within the Hawthorne sock yarn line. I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. But I love I love how drapey this yarn comes out when it's held double. And I was just so satisfied with the end product of this, hence why I cast on this sweater. So I actually cast on this sweater after I finished this entire hood. As for the construction, so I used 5mm needles and 4.5mm needles for the ribbing. And the pattern, the way it's constructed is basically you kind of knit this top piece first, this rectangle, and then you pick up along the sides and knit the hood part flat all the way down, and then eventually you join in the round here and knit a few rounds in the round, finish off with ribbing, and then you finish the front in ribbing as well. Let me see, I actually don't think I've even tried this on because I knit this for my husband, but it essentially creates this, cute little look where you have a little scarf piece and then the hood is nice and drapey and big so that it just, I don't know, it looks so cute. And like I said, I was originally going to knit this for myself, which is what I purchased this yarn for. But again, because I didn't have enough, I was like, well, what do I use? And so then I decided to experiment with this yarn. And I'm glad I did, because I actually think this creates even more of a drapey fabric, which I think lends itself to this design, because this design is meant to be like oversized and drapey. And I'll have put up a photo of my husband wearing it. He really likes it. I showed him the pattern because I was like, hey, would you be interested in this pattern? And he was like, oh, that looks cool. And he likes to wear baseball hats a lot as well. And so for him, how he styles this is he wears his baseball hat. He then wears this hood over his hat, and then sometimes like has his like winter hood over, depending on how cold it is when we commute into the city. But he's worn this every single day that he's commuted in, and he seems to really like it. It's warm because it's 80% wool held double. So, you know, it's not like going to be as warm as like a really tight kind of balaclava or anything, but he does say that it adds warmth, and I think it looks really good on him, honestly, the way he styles it. So I'm super, super happy with this. It was a really quick knit because the gauge is so big. And I didn't mind, you know, knitting flat, because you really only knit flat for a certain amount and then you knit in the round. It's not like knitting an entire garment flat. I think I will do this as like a gift knit in the future. It's one size, so, you know, it fits most. And yeah, I'm just going to ask my family members if there's anyone who is interested in something like this for Christmas or a birthday, and just knit them a version of this. So really, really pleased with this as well. My last completed object is my Oslo hat by Petite Knit. I knit this in the medium, which translates to her adult size. So she goes from like extra small. Now she actually just updated the pattern, which I am really happy about, because this used to only have 4 sizes, which is kind of strange because it's such a popular pattern. So I am glad that she ended up updating it. So now it has, I think, like 8 sizes. But I knit the medium size, which is the adult women's size from the old version. And the yarn that I used is the Alpaca Yarn Co. Paca Paints line in the color 419 Anemone. Anemone. That's how you say that word. I feel like Nemo, where I'm like, anemone. It's this absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous yarn. It's so pretty. I believe it's hand dyed, and it's 100% baby alpaca. It is so soft. I knit this on 3.5 millimeter needles, which I am actually not sure if that's the recommended needle size. Actually, I wonder if it's like 4, but I think it looks nice with the 3.5 needle size. And yeah, it's really soft. Like I said, I'm very sensitive to animal yarns, and I pretty much can't tolerate alpaca. But when I felt this in person, I was like, oh my God, it's so soft. And I guess baby alpaca is softer than regular alpaca. So I'm glad that I'm able to tolerate this yarn, and it just feels so luxurious and drapey. Now, the Oslo hat, like I said, is a very popular knit. It's like a very popular pattern. The way it's constructed is you essentially knit the brim, and then you fold it in on itself, and then you do a few rounds of knitting. Actually, you can see it's knit on this side, and then you do a German short row and essentially turn it inside out and knit the rest of the beanie, which is what is actually showing. And then at some point she has you switch to decreases and you finish. So it is a bottom up constructed beanie. I think that's pretty usual for a lot of beanies, that it's like you start at the brim and then you knit up and you do decreases. Now I'm confused, because I think the reason why she has you do these purl ridges or the knit ridges is so that when you fold the brim up, it's from the right side. I'm hoping I can explain this right. So once you fold it up, maybe this is a better example. Once you fold it up, it makes it so that there's only ever knits showing, which is fine, but it doesn't lay correctly. I think it doesn't lay right. So when it's folded like this, you can kind of see where that one layer of knitting starts and where the double brim ends. I'm honestly not even sure if in the video you can tell. It's a small detail, but in person I think it's more obvious, and it bothers me, and I don't know why. I don't know why that is. I don't know why she has you do that. It just, I don't know. It just bothers me a little bit. Like, can you see that line like right here? That's essentially where the brim is double, because the brim is basically essentially 4 layers, right? And then this is just 1 layer. Or yeah, sorry, 2 layers. And then this is 1 layer. So it creates almost like a dent. And again, it's a very small detail. You probably wouldn't notice if, if you're just a person, but you can see, yeah, okay, you can totally see it now. See that? It's because this layer is just, it puckers weird. And yes, like the knit stitches are still just the ones showing, but it looks weird. Like from back here, can't tell, totally fine. But again, it's something where because I knit it, I notice it. And this is the case for, this is the second Ozo hat I knit. So it's the same for the first one I knit, and it bothered me. But I don't know. I don't know how to fix it. I think it's just you can maybe just kind of lower it. Like if you just finagle with it a little bit, it's fine. But again, it kind of takes a little, yeah. Anyways, it's like a very small detail, but Petite Knit is such a big pattern designer and her patterns are so popular. I feel like I just have to go into the nitty gritty. But anyways, overall, I still like this construction, but I prefer, I think, muscle burrows to this, and muscle burrows are probably going to be my preferred knit beanie regardless. But anyways, beyond that, I do, as much as I love the yarn and everything, it's just, I don't think I picked the right yarn for a beanie. I think I needed a much more structured yarn for the Ozo hat. The first one I knit was in Sandisgarn Sunday held double, which is the recommended for the pattern, and Sandisgarn Sunday I think is just 100% wool, so it's very soft, but it's definitely more structured, and so the beanie just looks better. Like it really holds its shape, whereas this, I mean, you can see like it's just so floppy, and while that's nice and it's fine, if I wear this out all day, by the end of the day, it really stretches out because it just is so soft and floppy. And I don't know if I love the way it looks as a beanie. So I'm a little conflicted because I just love this yarn, but because the beanie is kind of loose and unstructured, I don't wear it that often, and I end up wearing my muscle burrow hat, which I pick up a lot, which I wear all the time. And it's just such a shame because again, like this yarn is beautiful and I wish I could wear it more often. So I'm thinking of like potentially frogging it and re-knitting this into a Sophie scarf or a little scarf. I had a whole hank of it that I purchased, so I know there's for sure enough yardage to knit a Sophie scarf even in the large size, and I think it would just lend it, I just think it would look better because of the drapiness of the yarn. It would just look better as a scarf than a beanie. So you all let me know in the comments what you think I should do. Like, do you think it's fine and I'm just, being too picky and I should just keep it? Or do you think I should frog it and make it into a scarf? I have to say, knitting with it was lovely because again, it's so soft and bouncy, and I really loved knitting with it. So it's not the end of the world if I have to frog it. But it's like you spend so much time knitting something, it's like always like a pain if you have to. But you can even see, like, look how the brim folds over on itself because it's such a heavy fabric and really, yeah, it's kind of a pity. I don't know. Let me know down below what you think I should do. Maybe I'll just sit on it for like a year, like maybe until the next winter. And if I really just didn't wear it again, that will be the year that I frog it and remake it into a Sophie scarf. Who knows? TBD on that. But I did want to show it. It's absolutely beautiful. And I highly recommend this yarn. It's so luxurious. And it was just so expensive, or else I would have purchased a sweater quantity. So yeah. All right, let's get into some whips. And I have been recording for 40 minutes, almost 40 minutes, but that's okay. I honestly prefer mega podcast episodes, because then I can just put on one for like an hour and a half and not have to switch YouTube channels while I'm knitting, or YouTube videos while I'm knitting. So I hope you all appreciate these longer episodes as well. All right, this is my number one whip that I am focusing on, and that is the Storm Sweater Junior. You can see I've made a lot of progress, and the only reason I have not featured this on any podcast episodes so far is because I am knitting a whole start to finish knitting vlog on this storm sweater, and that vlog already is going to be over an hour long, I know. So I'm not going to talk about this in this segment really, because I want to save everything for that knitting vlog, but I did want to tease it because I'm really proud of it. And if you want to watch that vlog, then subscribe and you'll be able to get notified when it comes out. But this is what it looks like so far. And yeah, I am knitting it in the Knit Picks Gloss DK weight yarn in Smoky Quartz. And it is a, let's see, 70% merino wool, 30% silk yarn. The gauge that they recommend is about 22 stitches per 10 centimeters on like 3.5 to 4 millimeter needles. And I did not gauge swatch for this pattern because it's all over texture, and I just find those hard to gauge swatch for. And I was pretty confident that if I knit the largest junior size, it would get me this oversized fit, which it definitely does. You can see how big this is just even on my body. Like I could wear this right now with my stomach, no problem. So it's definitely going to be oversized when I'm not pregnant, which is the look that I wanted. And yeah, I'm loving it so far. I think I'm glad with my yarn choice and color choice. I think it really makes the stitches pop. It's kind of like this brown mauve gray color. It's definitely a warmer toned brown, but when you look at it, you might not think brown right away. There's definitely some purpley mauve in there. So it's kind of a hard color to describe, but yeah, that is it so far. I've basically done the entire body and the neckline. Neck looks a little weird, but that's just because I did not do the double folded neck like I did with this one, because I wanted the neck to sit a little more open like this and loose, because I didn't want it to be so tight against my neck. So that was a choice that I may regret. If I block it and I don't like the way it looks, I'll just rip it out, because it's just, it's just a tiny bit of ribbing that I need to redo. But for now, this is the neck I'm envisioning. So now all I have to do is the sleeves, and I've kind of just taken a little bit of a break because I feel like so accomplished just after finishing the body and the neck that I just want to work on some other things, get some cast on bugs out of me, have some things going that are mindless, and then return to this when I feel ready to. Yeah, but I wanted to share it and tease it here anyways. Actually, quick note I will say about the storm sweater is I usually pick the junior size of petite knit patterns if I can, because the largest size in her junior size range usually corresponds to the smallest women's size, which is the size that I knit, because her patterns are so oversized that I tend to just default knit the smallest size. And so I just did some pattern comparisons and figured that the junior would work. Now the patterns cost the same amount, so you're not saving any money on buying the junior pattern, but for me, I was envisioning also knitting my son a matching sweater, and the junior size goes all the way down to age, let's see what she puts, ages 1 to 2, which is probably the size I'd be knitting for him. I probably want to knit him something maybe when he's like 5 to 6 years old. And so for me, that was just more bang for my buck, because now I get 2 patterns for one instead of having to purchase the women's and then eventually purchasing the junior anyways. So that was just my logic behind it. There's no other reason. Like if you weren't gonna knit another smaller size, then I would just recommend getting the women's size. That's fine. But if you are like me and potentially have children in your life that you want to gift knit for, then that's a good way of saving a few bucks on a pattern. Is if you can fit into the junior sizes, then I would just purchase that. The next whip I have has kind of been my commute knit. I have not been commuting into the city too often now that I'm pregnant, but I usually go in about once a week, and my commute is 2 hours one way, believe it or not. Yes, on the train. So there's a lot of just sitting on the train time, but that is great mindless knitting time. So I always have a smaller project on my needles, whether it's a Sophie scarf or a hat or something that I can bring to work. And for me, what I decided to cast on a while ago is the Melange Sweater Baby. This is what it looks like now. Obviously, this is not a melange because it's a solid color, but the way that, and it's by Petite Knit, and the way that she writes the melange sweater is essentially 2 fingering weight yarns held double, and that's what creates this melange look. I'll put a picture of what her pattern actually looks like so you get a sense. And I had knit my husband the melange sweater man. That was in my last podcast episode, I'm pretty sure. I'll also put a picture of what that looks like. And I decided to just purchase the baby pattern because initially I was going to knit our baby a matching sweater with my husband. And I still have plans to do that in the future, but I realized that I had enough leftover Sandisgarn double Sunday yarn from my Ingrid sweater that I knit last year. I had so much yarn left over because I way underestimated the length and everything, and I just did not use up all the yarn that I purchased. So I had like 4 skeins left over, which is crazy because that sweater is so small. I don't know why I didn't just knit a bigger size. All that aside, wasn't quite enough to knit a sweater. Maybe I could have knitted a vest, but I had used some of that yarn for some other smaller projects last year. So I essentially have about 2.5 balls left. So I did some yarn math and looked at Petite Knit baby patterns and was like, well, this is the perfect amount to knit him a baby sweater. So I started the Melange baby sweater. I'm knitting him this in the size, this is hilarious because this is supposed to be the 6 to 9 month size, yet the Stockholm slipover is for 1 to 2. And like, look how, like, this is like the same size to me in my head. Yeah, like they're okay, the vest is like marginally bigger, but it's just so funny because like, again, Petite Knit patterns tend to be oversized, and that's definitely a look. And for my baby, like I don't want to suffocate him, especially with a 100% wool yarn anyways, but I just find that funny that the 6 to 9 month is going to be the same size as that 1 to 2 year vest. But like this doesn't have sleeves or a neck yet, so I've just clearly just finished the body. But I just love the double Sunday yarn. It's so soft, and I wish I could knit all my sweaters in this yarn, but it's just so dang expensive that it's a little hard to justify. But hence why I wanted to use up every inch of that yarn. And yeah, so I basically got to this point, and now I'm at a dilemma because I have about 40 grams left of a ball, 45 grams left of a ball, maybe, and I'm a little worried that that's not enough to do the sleeves and the neck. Even though when you look at the pattern, I technically had just about enough yarn to do the whole sweater, I'm like questioning it, and I'm like, do I? I'm like, maybe I don't. So I'm kind of at a crossroads. Like I said, I finished the body, I just have the sleeves and the neck. Now I do have about 49 grams of the Sandisgarn Perfect yarn. Maybe not, oh no, sorry. So this is just okay, so this is a blend of wool and nylon, whereas this yarn, the Double Sunday, is 100% wool, I believe. And the gauge is about the same. And so I'm thinking maybe what I do is I'm gonna knit the sleeves in blue, in this blue yarn, and then do the neck finishing in the red. And then maybe I'll even do like the ribbing on the sleeves in the red, because I definitely have enough of the red yarn to do the neck finishing and the sleeve finishing, and obviously the body is already finished in rib, so I think that would look kind of nice. But the bulk of the sleeve will be blue, and it'll just be kind of a red-blue color block, which I think is kind of nice. I originally envisioned this to be just a bright red basic sweater that he could wear for like Chinese New Year and Christmas. It's just a nice red sweater. Obviously the blue will just give that a different look. and I don't know. You know, it's meant to just use up scrap yarn, so I'm not gonna think about it too much. That's probably what I'm gonna do. I'll do the sleeves in the blue, but all the finishings in the red, and it'll just be kind of a hodgepodge put together baby sweater that I use scrap yarn on, which is fine. Again, like, he's not gonna care what I put him in when he's 2 years old, you know? So I think that'll look cute. I mean, I think the blue, you know, obviously the blue for boy, it's kind of nice. It's just not quite what I envisioned when I started this, but that's okay. That's probably what I'm going to do. And I don't think the perfect, like, washing and blocking wise will be too different from the double Sunday. So I think it'll be fine. Again, this is really more of a scrap project anyways, but I am excited to see how it'll turn out, and I will of course update you all. Next up, I have cast on my first summer knit of the year. Oh my God, looking at this is just like, it makes me laugh because I'm literally knitting with thread. This is the Tombow Tee by Florence Miller. And this is actually the second time I'm knitting this t-shirt. If you saw my Everything I Knit in 2024, I knitted a sport weight version of this t-shirt because it was like the second, maybe first garment I ever cast on, and I didn't understand gauge or yarn weight or anything. So that t-shirt, the gauge is completely off, and it's more of a sport weight t-shirt, which I still like. I still think it came out nice, but it's not nearly what the pattern initially intends, because the pattern calls for a 27 stitch gauge, and I think with that t-shirt I was probably closer to like 24 stitch gauge. And anyways, so I did want to knit it again in a true summer yarn, and I am knitting it with the Knitting for Olive Pure Silk in the color Brown Bear. And this was part of the same order that I made when I purchased this yarn, but funnily enough, when I was first purchasing this yarn, I actually only purchased enough to make the Audrey top by Petite Knit. And the Audrey top is Knitting for Olive Pure Silk, but held double. So the gauge on that one I think is like 20 or 22 or something. And I was gonna knit that tank top. That was the plan I had, so I bought enough yarn for that. However, the more I looked at the pattern, the more I was just like, why did I do that? Because I don't ever wear spaghetti strap tank tops. And the way that tank top is constructed, I'd basically have to just wear pasties or a strapless bra, which once I give birth, like, I'm not wearing a strapless bra, you know, like, for the most part, like, that garment is just gonna not be worn for years, I feel like. And even pre-pregnancy, I was not really wearing tank tops with spaghetti straps. So I think the only reason why I decided to purchase that pattern and the yarn for it was because I wanted to try out Knitting for Olive Pure Silk, but I was a little intimidated at holding the yarn single, and so that pattern has you holding it double, so it just felt less intimidating. I'll also say, I obviously am not knitting that because I was like, well, it's still gonna take me a long time to knit, and then if I never wear it, like, what was the point? So I ended up looking in my collection for some other t-shirts. I could have also potentially done the Cumulus Tee O-neck again, I think, but I think that actually maybe it has a similar gauge, but I don't know. I just decided to go with the Tombow Tee because I wanted something different, and the first time I knit this, I knit it completely off gauge, so it just didn't look the way I wanted it to, whereas the Cumulus Tee O-neck, I knit it in the correct gauge and weight, and it looks, you know, like how it's intended. So that's why I chose this pattern. I'm knitting it in the size B, which is the second size, and this is not the recommended yarn, but there are tons of projects that people have done in the Knitting for Olive Pure Silk and Knitting for Olive Merino. So I could have done it with either, but like I said, I had the Pure Silk on hand. The only thing is now I'm pretty sure I won't have enough because I only have 3 skeins of it, and I think I might need like 3.5 or 4 skeins. But I'm not as worried because this is pretty much just a standard dyed yarn. So I'm really hoping that if I have to end up purchasing more yarn, that I'll just make a bigger Knitting for Olive purchase, and that the fact that it's coming from a different dye lot won't matter too much. I may regret that. But I did see on some projects that people were able to knit the entire t-shirt in 3 balls of yarn, so I might not need to do that. Anyways, that was a lot of details for a whip, sorry. But I'm essentially at the part where I'm now just knitting completely in the round. I won't talk too much about the construction and all that because I will talk about that once it's a completed object. But yeah, this is what it looks like so far. And this is basically a mindless knit once you get into the round, because you're just doing standard raglan increases every other round. And I have to say, knitting with this truly feels like knitting with thread. The gauge on the Knitting for Olive website for this yarn is 28 stitches on 3mm needles. And so I did not gauge swatch because I just, I'm a bad knitter, okay? I don't gauge swatch. So I am knitting this with 3.25mm needles in order to hit the 27 stitch gauge, which again, I'm just eyeballing. I may regret that, but I just cannot be bothered to gauge swatch. So it's fine. I'm pretty much hitting gauge now. So it's like, it's not the end of the world if it's like a little off, but that's just my opinion and I'm willing to risk that. So what else? Yeah, it's quite intimidating to knit on, but I'm more confident that I'm going to be able to finish this because this is now the second summer knit that I have done. And I technically also knit the muscle burrow hat in two muscle burrow hats in fingering weight yarn. So I'm just less intimidated now with summer knits, which I'm happy about because I love the way they look. And again, I really wanted to try out this silk from Knitting for Olive because I've heard so many good things about it. And a lot of people I watch on YouTube say that when they do summer knits in this fabric, it's like their most go-to object because once it blocks out, it's like super soft and cooling. And of course it's pure silk, so it's going to feel great. And there's no itch factor because for me, I'm not going to be sensitive to silk. I will say when you're knitting with this pre-blocked, it feels rough. Like it almost feels like you're knitting with a cotton fiber because the silk really doesn't have any elasticity. I think it's maybe marginally more elastic than cotton, but not by a lot. However, because the thread is so thin, it doesn't hurt my hands like a cotton yarn would. So I haven't had any troubles knitting on this, and this has now kind of become my mindless knit that I do. And it's also thin and small enough that I could commute with this because it's not quite like a sweater and it'll just kind of bunch up in my bag. So this will probably become my commute knit once I finish the melange sweater for the baby. And yeah, this is kind of also my no timeline knit. I like to have a whip on the needles that's just like, I'm going to pick it up when I want to work on it, but there's no pressure, there's no deadline because I'm not, maybe I'll wear this like once I give birth and stuff, but it's fine if I don't get to it. And we also have a big trip to China planned to go back with our newborn baby to visit all of my extended family in China. So worst comes to worst, I can actually just save this as my main project that I bring with me on vacation, which is how I get these summer knits done because it's the only thing I'm knitting on. So I'm not too worried about finishing this, and it's just a nice whip to have when I want to work on it. Now, if you thought I was done with whips, I'm not. We have 2 more to go. Okay. This one is so fun. It's like barely a whip. Like look how, like I feel embarrassed even showing this, but I am planning on knitting a baby blanket. I finally found a pattern that I like the look of, and that is all over garter stitch. So even though it's knit flat, I don't have to do any purling. And you can sort of just begin to tell what this pattern is going to look like, but it is a free pattern, I'm pretty sure. So the pattern is by Lion Brand. It's free. Like I said, it's an all over garter stitch with little eyelets on the border, and that's just created by doing yarn overs. And you just knit from one corner, basically knit all the way, and then you do decreases and knit to the other corner. The finished blanket size is going to be 30 by 30 inches, so it's definitely for a baby. And you can use the Lion Brand yarn. They usually suggest one of their yarns, but I just went to Michael's and picked up I went to Hobby Lobby and picked up this like chenille yarn. I have it here. It is the Baby Bee. It's basically a yarn bee. I think they maybe exclusively sell it at Hobby Lobby, but they have a whole Baby Bee line, which is like their soft baby yarn. This is the Soft and Snuggly line in the colorway Storm Swept. And it's just a nice, variegated yarn with nice, like some dark blue, some light blue, some white. I just thought it would look nice. And they have a few different other colorways, and this was just the one that I thought looked the nicest. And this is also kind of just I'm gonna work on it when I feel like it knit. The yarn, while it's like very soft because it's that chenille, it has zero give, so it's not like the nicest to knit with. So I'm not, again, pressuring myself to finish this. I mean, I obviously want to finish this before he gets here, so technically there is more of a deadline with this one, but it's gonna knit up very quickly because the gauge is so large and the yarn is nice and squishy. So I'm not quite focusing on it now. I just basically wanted to get it cast on so that I can pick it up and knit it. But yeah, my baby isn't due until the end of April, so I have like 3 full months to work on it, which, you know, again, I could probably like bang it out in a weekend if I really needed to. So that's technically a whip that's barely on the needles. And my last whip that I just teased earlier is my now 3rd muscle burrow hat. I literally cast this on this morning, and the yarn that I'm using is the Knit Picks Capra DK weight in Magnolia Heather. It is a 85% fine merino wool, 15% cashmere. Knit Picks was basically having a sale on all of their luxury yarns, and it's still ongoing, I'm pretty sure. So I'll link them down below in case you're curious. But this is a really, really, really soft and luxurious yarn because of that cashmere. However, strangely, when I made this purchase a while ago, I only purchased 6 balls of this yarn, which is not enough to make me a sweater. It's barely enough, I think, to make me a vest, and I don't ever really wear sweater vests, so I've kind of stopped knitting them. And I maybe had enough to knit a scarf, but not really. And I don't know why I only purchased 6 balls. I have no idea what I was thinking when I purchased it. I should have just purchased a sweater quantity, but kind of worked out because when I looked at the yarn again online just to be like, do I want to just buy more and gamble with the dye lot again? I'm not going to do that. But a lot of the reviews actually said that this yarn, while very soft and a dream to knit with, pills like crazy. So once I saw that, I was like, all right, maybe it's good that I didn't buy a sweater quantity because, you know, with a garment that you're wearing, there's obviously way more risk for pilling. So I just kind of had it sitting there for a while, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to knit with it. I mean, I could knit a baby garment with it. I don't mind putting my son in pink, you know, like he can wear pink, it doesn't really matter. But if it was gonna pill a lot too, I was like, okay, like I'm not sure. I also have 2 small nieces, so I was like, I can knit one of them something. But again, I was just like so back and forth with stuff. And eventually what I decided on is obviously casting on a muscle burrow hat. And the reasoning for that is because the last 2 muscle burrow hats that I've knitted have been all in fingering weight yarn. And while the muscle burrow hat is a gaugeless pattern, aka you can pretty much knit it from a fingering weight to like a heavy DK weight yarn, most projects and people that I see knit it on fingering weight yarn, which makes sense because the drape that you get from that is beautiful with fingering weight yarn. And I do think the pattern shines the best in fingering weight yarn. However, I could not for the life of me find anyone who had knit it in a DK weight. And maybe I'm just not searching for it right on YouTube or something. And even on Ravelry, it's like the majority of the projects are all done in fingering weight. And I was just curious because I'm like, well, I do want to know what it looks like if you were to knit it with a DK weight. Like obviously it would be really chunky because it's a pretty much double layered beanie with a brim. So you would get a very chunky look, but you would also get more warmth because obviously a DK weight doubled and then quadrupled on your brim is going to be warmer than a fingering weight. But I just couldn't see any samples online. And so I was just curious and I'm like, well, I have this nice cashmere yarn. I'm not going to make it into a garment. I might as well experiment and use it for the muscle burrow because, you know, for a beanie, I feel like it's okay if it pills more. It's like it's not going to rub against anything really except your head. So I just feel like there's way less risk for pilling. And I'm really liking the way it's looking so far, but this is obviously just one layer. It eventually will double in on itself. So I'm curious again, just to see how bulky it would be with the DK weight. And I think if I really like the look of it, I would probably knit the muscle burrow again in a DK weight. So that is my current reasoning. And I apologize if you're not familiar at all with the muscle burrow hat, but I have episodes where I talk more in detail on the pattern. But it's just such a popular pattern. I feel like most people know what I'm talking about. But I essentially finished with the increases and I'm now just knitting in the round. I know this looks comically small, but this yarn is very bouncy and I want to make sure that this beanie fits a little more snug. So I am knitting the junior size and I think it'll be fine. Worst case, if it's too small, I'll give it to one of my nieces. It's okay. Again, I'm more so knitting this as an experiment to see what it looks like with the DK weight yarn. So I'm not too bummed if I end up having to give one to my niece. That's fine. But yeah, I'm liking the fabric it creates. This technically calls for, the stitch gauge is actually 20 to 22 stitches on like a 3.5 or 3.75 to 4.5 millimeter needle, but I wanted to create this more dense fabric. And so I'm actually knitting this on 3.5 millimeter needles and I'm able to get a 24 stitch gauge. So that's good to know in case you are looking at this for a sweater. If you just go down a size, you can hit that 24 stitch gauge, which is kind of like a nice sport weight sweater. So in case you're interested in that, but yeah, I'm liking the way it looks so far. This can also be a commute knit for me. As of now, I just wanted to get it started this morning so that I had something again on the needles that I can pick up when I feel like working on it. And I have to say the yarn is very luxurious and super soft. And it's a bummer that people say that it pills because I would love to knit a full garment in this. And maybe I will. Maybe I will just knit it in a color where the pills won't show as much. But yeah, it's really nice. And with the sale going on, it's very affordable compared to some other luxury yarns. So I would definitely check out the Knit Picks Capra line. Okay, I am officially over the 1 hour mark and my battery is running low. So I'm going to try to speak quickly. I'm going to go into acquisitions. With my Knitting for Olive purchase, I did also pick up their soft silk mohair just to see what it's like in person. Unfortunately, it is definitely scratchy and itchy, and I could see that if I held this with anything, it would not be nice. Again, I initially purchased it because I wanted to hold these double for the Harris hood, but obviously because I didn't do that, I just didn't end up using the mohair because I wasn't gonna risk that with a baby garment. I was like, no, this is definitely too itchy, so I didn't want to put it in the vest. So now I just have it. I mean, it's fine. Like, it wasn't super expensive to just buy one, ball of this, but unfortunately it still makes me itchy. So I think I'm just gonna omit adding any mohair to any sweater patterns that I knit in the future. I was just hoping that this one would be softer than the Sandisgarn one, and it is, but it's still not quite soft enough for me to want to knit with it. But I thought I would show it. This is also in the slate green color, and it's a beautiful color, but just unfortunate. And then I obviously had mentioned some of the yarns that I had purchased with the whips that I have. So those are technically acquisitions, but I won't repeat myself. The only other acquisition that I have is this one. This is the Yarn Bee Soft and Sleek DK. It's like 100% acrylic, low pill acrylic. Looks like this. And my plan for this is to actually knit some penny gloves by Petite Knit. I purchased that pattern and I want to knit those because I had knit my mom a pair of gloves at the beginning of this year, last year. I think they were in my last podcast episode, but I used a Barocco wool, which I think is just 100% superwash wool, maybe 100% wool. It was just some scrap yarn that I had that I wanted to use up, and my mom uses them every day. She loves them, but she says that they really start to stretch out. Maybe it's because of the superwash content, but she just says that she wears them all the time, but that they're kind of getting stretched out. And so I want to knit her another pair of fingerless gloves, and I've wanted to try the penny glove pattern for a while, so I just figured I would purchase that because the one that I knit for her is a free pattern. which I still like. I like that pattern, but again, I just wanted to try something different. The penny gloves actually are a much smaller gauge. It's like almost like fingering weight gauge to like sport weight. I think it's like 25 stitch gauge. And so I think this yarn will be nice and thin for that and dense. And hopefully the acrylic, because it's acrylic, will hold its shape a little bit better and won't expand as much over time. So this is just an experiment. This yarn is very cheap. It's like, yeah, $4.99 for this giant hank. So this will obviously give me more than enough to do the penny gloves. And if those work out, then maybe I'll knit myself a pair of penny gloves. And I think that's nice for accessories to use acrylic because again, it's a little more hard wearing. It's easier to wash and care for. And, you know, I feel like I don't mind knitting accessories with acrylic as much. And honestly, I was thinking if the penny gloves come out nice, then I might just knit a muscle burrow in this yarn as well, because there's definitely enough in here for a full muscle burrow as well. So those are kind of the acquisition / future plans that I have for this yarn. All right, we are done with this mega podcast episode. Again, my usual podcast episodes aren't this long. It was just because this is encompassing a lot of like post-holiday knitting, and I haven't done one of these in a while, so there's a lot to talk about. But usually my episodes are not this long. But let me know if you've been liking this length, because personally I really like longer episode lengths. But I hope you all enjoyed. If you are new here, I would love it if you subscribed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.